Capcom has been making it clear for some time now that Nintendo Switch 2 is one of their top priorities. From the announcement of Resident Evil Requiem to the strong presence we saw at the Game Awards 2025, the Japanese company has been heavily backing Nintendo's new console. And among those announcements, one in particular stood out: Pragmata, Capcom's new IP that has been in development for years and now finally has a confirmed release date of April 24th, 2026. We had a chance to play a demo of the game on Nintendo Switch 2, and the impressions were very positive. Pragmata puts us in the role of Hugh, an astronaut who must escape from a lunar station alongside Diana, an android girl with the ability to hack both the environment and the enemies. At its core, it's a third-person action game that blends shooting, real-time hacking, and a relentless pace that barely gives you a moment to breathe. So here's what we thought after playing it for the first time on Nintendo Switch 2. Pragmata is probably one of the most visually impressive games we've seen so far on Nintendo Switch 2. Capcom has managed to make its new IP look spectacular on Nintendo's console, with visuals that act as a true showcase of what the hardware is capable of. And that's despite the fact that the areas we explored in this demo are relatively enclosed. Even so, the quality of the effects, the lighting, and the overall level of detail convey a sense of power that we have not seen in many other titles on the system so far. The game uses dynamic resolution to maintain a very stable 60 frames per second, and it succeeds. During our play session, we didn't notice any stuttering or drops that disrupted the flow of action, which is pretty essential in a game that demands so much constant attention. That said, the resolution scaling is noticeable in specific elements. Diana's hair, for example, loses definition at certain moments, and some light beams, highlights, or visual artifacts reveal the system is working hard to keep performance smooth. It does not ruin the experience, but it is noticeable if you're looking closely. In handheld mode, Pragmata still looks surprisingly good. The difference compared to TV mode is minimal, almost imperceptible in the middle of the action, which reinforces the feeling that Capcom has done a very solid job with optimization, because honestly, being able to take this visual presentation anywhere is one of the major attractions of the Switch 2 version, and in this case, it more than meets expectations. If there's one thing that defines Pragmata's gameplay, it's multitasking. It is not enough to simply aim and shoot. Hugh constantly relies on the help of Diana, the android girl who accompanies him, in order to deal with enemies effectively. She's in charge of hacking the androids and making them vulnerable, while you focus on dodging attacks, moving around the environment, and staying alive. Only once the hacking process is complete can you actually defeat the enemies and do more than just scratch them. The hacking system is not just a single button press either. It takes the form of a small real-time puzzle. A grid of blocks actually appears on screen, and you must trace a specific path through certain tiles to complete the hack. Meanwhile though, enemies are not just politely waiting for you to finish. This mechanic forces you to constantly split your attention, creating a frantic rhythm that feels closer to a classic arcade game than to a traditional shooter. But there are also different ways to hack and fight. Some actions target individual enemies, but certain weapons can create electric fields that temporarily immobilize groups of androids. This gives you a brief window to hack several enemies one by one while they're stuck inside the area. It is very satisfying when it works, but also highly demanding when the pressure's on. Pragmata does not hide what it wants to be: a pure action game with an arcade soul. The design encourages you to do several things at once without pause: shooting, dodging, hacking, and moving around the environment in a constant dance that never really lets you let your guard down. To add more variety to this frantic pace, the game lets you acquire different weapons throughout the experience, opening up new combat options and allowing you to adapt to each situation depending on your playstyle. This arcade approach is reinforced by a detail that says a lot about Capcom's intentions. After completing each stage, the game shows the time you took to finish it. Now, this is not just a decorative stat, but a clear invitation to come back, replay, and try to do it better. It's clearly a design focused on replayability and self-improvement that fits perfectly with a classic arcade philosophy of just one more run. Finally, Pragmata includes motion controls for aiming, allowing you to fine-tune your shots by moving the controller. It's an addition that Switch 2 players are already expecting in this type of game, and once you get used to it, it can make a real difference during the most intense combat moments. What we have seen of Pragmata in this demo has left us with very good impressions. On a technical level, Capcom has made its new IP one of the most visually striking games on Nintendo Switch 2, with solid performance in both TV mode and and handheld mode. It's the kind of title you'll want to show off to demonstrate what the console is actually capable of, and that's always a positive point. As for the gameplay, the mix of shooting and real-time hacking works really well. The idea of having to solve small puzzles while also dodging enemies and staying alive adds an extra layer of depth that sets Pragmata apart from more conventional shooters. The arcade-style pacing, the variety of weapons, and the time-based system that encourages replaying stages all come together to form a fun foundation with its own identity. That said, what we have played is only a small sample, and it leaves us wanting to see more. The ideas are definitely there, and they work really well, but the big question is how far this concept can go without becoming repetitive over the course of a full-length adventure. Needless to say, Capcom has something with a lot of potential on its hands. Now it's time to see whether it can fully deliver on it, and we'll find out on April 24th, 2026. And now we move on to Resident Evil Requiem, which we were able to play in TV mode on Nintendo Switch 2. Up until now, we had only seen the game running in handheld mode at 60 frames per second, so this was the perfect chance to check how the new Resident Evil performs when connected to a TV. Now, we're going to focus exclusively on how the game looks and runs on Nintendo's console, so if you want more details about the gameplay itself, we recommend checking out our Resident Evil Requiem gameplay impressions, which we have linked here. So the demo we played put us in the role of Grace Ashcroft during one of the game's early sections. The main character appears tied up and kidnapped inside a kind of sinister mansion, and our goal is to escape by solving a series of puzzles in order to move forward. But of course, she is not alone. A huge monster is chasing her relentlessly through the mansion's corridors, adding that constant tension that the series is known for. It's a section that mixes exploration, puzzle solving, and fleeing from danger, very much in line with what Capcom has been refining for years. In terms of gameplay, the experience is very similar to what we tried with Grace in the previous demo. However, we believe this was an early development build, although this was not officially confirmed. The main reason we think that is that it didn't include some of the latest features that were present in the PlayStation 5 Pro version, such as motion controls, so this makes us think that Capcom is still polishing this version for Switch 2. The first thing worth highlighting is that the game runs at a very stable 60 frames per second. At no point during our session did we notice stuttering or performance drops, which makes the animations look very smooth and the game feel responsive on the console. Switch 2 has no trouble running Resident Evil Requiem, and that's very good news for anyone who wants to experience Capcom's horror on Nintendo's hybrid system. However, the visual side is noticeably simpler than expected. The native image resolution is not very high, around 540p according to our estimates, and individual pixels are easy to spot on some character models and environments. We do not believe that any kind of AI upscaling technology has been used, something that will likely change in the final version. Now, in terms of textures, reflections, and visual effects, the game falls pretty short compared to other platforms, especially when placed next to Pragmata, whose development is much further along and looks significantly better. Where this version really shines though is with the lighting, which is one of the most important elements in any horror game. The use of light and shadow creates a very strong atmosphere that keeps attention high at all times. This is of course the kind of detail that makes a real difference when you're exploring dark hallways with a monster right behind you, and Capcom has clearly prioritized this aspect even in an early build. Now, it is likely that the final version will show major improvements in the visual department. Capcom still has time until the release date to apply optimizations, and considering how much other titles have improved between their first demos and their final releases, we certainly would not rule out Resident Evil Requiem looking much better than what we've seen so far. For now, however, the performance feels very solid, although the visuals still have room for improvement. Our overall impressions of this hands-on with Resident Evil Requiem on Nintendo Switch 2 are mixed. From a gameplay perspective, Capcom's new title really impressed us. The tension, the atmosphere, the puzzles, and that monster chasing us through the mansion corridors left us wanting much more. We believe this is going to be one of the most important games coming to the console this year, and horror fans are going to enjoy this entry a lot. From a technical standpoint, however, at least in the version we played, the game does not quite meet the expectations we had for Nintendo Switch 2. The resolution is very low, and even though the 60 frames per second performance is excellent, we feel the console could be pushed much further. I mean, Switch 2 is capable of way more, and we don't even have to look far to prove it. Pragmata, which was being shown right next to it at the event, demonstrated a much stronger visual presentation. So for all these reasons, reasons, we're hopeful that the final version will show a clear improvement over what we've seen so far. But what did you think about Capcom's new games for Nintendo Switch 2? Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss anything about the console. And don't forget to check out the latest videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time.